life begins to germinate from the first eye contact between a woman and a man. It's with our brains that we see. The perceived image is transmitted to the frontal regions of the brain, situated above the eyes, where the sexual significance of the image is decoded. The corpus spongiosum of the penis then fills with blood. But most of the time, excitation is not followed by sexual intercourse. The caudal nucleus acts as an inhibitory block.
The brain also plays a role in the inhibition of sexual behavior. In monkeys, temporal lobotomy leads to sexual frenzy. And in humans, we know that the result would be the same without these inhibitory blocks. There would be unrestrained sexual behavior, known as hypersexuality.
Our sexuality is in some way the outcome of a permanent conflict between two parts of our brains that battle for the control of our behavior. The primitive animal brain that shelters the basic drives linked to the reproductive instinct, and a higher brain, rational and influenced by education, which regulates our social behavior. If our brain decides that the sight of someone does us good, then nerve cells stimulate the hypothalamus, which transforms the nervous message into a hormonal message. A cocktail of hormones is released. Their conductor, the pituitary gland, orchestrates the ballet of the hormones. These hormones diffuse a feeling of well-being and relaxation throughout the brain and the body via the circulatory system. If the brains of a man and a woman are compared after receiving a visual stimulus, more zones are activated in the male brain than in the female brain, a finding that cannot be explained by differences in the brain's architecture or education.
Men and women are primed to respond to these types of sexual cues. Now, that doesn't mean they necessarily want to have sex, because having sex is also dependent on how they feel psychologically, and that is, of course, related to a number of different relationship and contextual factors.
So why do we fall in love with a particular person? When an image hits the retina, signals are then transmitted towards the back of the brain, where we stock information about our sensory past. Between the ages of 5 and 8 years, we begin to build a map of love, a subconscious list of our preferred physical, behavioral, and cultural characteristics. When we meet someone who corresponds with this map, sparks begin to fly. The emotion incited by the voice, the smile, and the gestures of the partner provokes body signals that are more or less conscious and detectable. Glistening eyes, pupil dilation, lip swelling, and endorphin is also secreted. Blood pressure increases, and excessive sweating occurs as desire mounts. In men, the male hormone testosterone is transformed into a chemical substance called androsterone, which is carried in sweat to the surface of the skin. This substance is then devoured by tiny bacteria, producing a more or less pleasant odor. These vapors also contain odorless pheromones. The pheromones are detected by our vomeronasal organ, a little pouch situated in the nasal septum. This primitive organ has no connection with our sense of smell. It sends its signals directly to our primitive brain without passing through the higher brain. So it could be that our subconscious perception of pheromones determines our choice of partner.
Beauty, love, and hormones. Beauty, love.
But what is the effect of kissing and caressing?
We have found that these C fibers respond particularly well to a slow stroking of the skin, and they do not respond so well or hardly at all to a rapid stroking of the skin. Perhaps we have underestimated the power or the importance of sensual touch for human well-being.
When a precise zone is stimulated, certain nerve fibers react more than others. The C fibers stimulate the regions of the brain activated by emotion and sexual excitation. Stimulated in this way, the brain begins to produce the hormone oxytocin, often referred to as the cuddle hormone. When we fall in love, our bodies produce an amphetamine-like hormone which provokes hyperactivity. This explains how we're capable of spending whole nights talking and making love to our sweethearts. During foreplay, the hypothalamus secretes neurohormones that stimulate the pituitary gland, which in turn liberates the hormones that stimulate the ovaries and testicles. In a chain reaction, the testicles and ovaries then release their own hormones, the androgens and the estrogens. Under their influence, blood flows into the corpus cavernum and spongiosum of the penis. Out of 500 million sperm, only one can hope for victory.
When the ejaculate comes out into the vagina, everybody thinks that the sperm swim immediately to the egg and fertilize it. It doesn't happen like that at all. When the ejaculate comes out into the vagina, first of all, it coagulates into a soft ball. It takes time for enzymes to break this ball down and for sperm to be able to swim out of the ball into the pathway to the uterus.
Only 1% of the sperm will cross the cervix after an exhausting 18-centimeter long race. 1,000 ripples are necessary to cover just 1 centimeter. To succeed in this marathon, the sperm have a secret. Their flagella are made up of strands surrounded by batteries, the mitochondria which provide the energy for this major challenge.
That's life. That's what people say. Riding high in April, shut down in May. Each time I find myself flat on my face, I pick myself up and get back in the race. That's life. I can't deny it. I thought I quit, but my heart just won't bite.
The ovum is drawn into the fallopian tube, moved along by the tiny vibrating cilia like a fringe lining the tube. Then the ovum must wait a day or two for the marathon sperm to arrive. If the sexual act takes place during ovulation, a baby will result on average 1 time out of 4, as sperm still has to succeed in fertilizing the ovum. The sperm's second challenge is to perforate the ovum's armor. No third challenge for the winner. Once inside, the ovum becomes impenetrable to the other candidates. The two nuclei, male and female, move together and fuse. One contains the genes of the father, the other those of the mother. You then have one chance in 64 billion of becoming the person that you are. The newly formed diploid cell undergoes the first cellular division and a new life begins. The fertilized egg, as it continues its migration, will go through innumerable cellular divisions. It divides into 2 cells, then 4, 8, 16, and it continues. Embryologist Claire Chazot studies the destiny of cells.
At first, all the cells are identical, and after several days they begin to differentiate. The exterior cells begin to flatten, and later they'll give rise to the placenta, while the interior cells remain rounded and will give rise to all the different embryonic tissues, such as the heart and the liver. The cells communicate with each other about whether to remain as they are or to differentiate, for example into heart or liver cells, and they talk through the means of thousands of receptors on the cell's surface.
More than 10,000 receptors receive these different messages. When the cell receives a signal, its nucleus, containing the chromosomes of the father and the mother, synthesizes a very mobile messenger RNA, which enables the cell to produce the materials, based on this genetic information, necessary for reproducing another cell.
Why are the cells different? Each cell contains a computer, the chromosomes, and each computer has the same programs, the genes. The differences between cells are determined by which programs are turned on and which are turned off.
5 days after fertilization, the embryo has been sliding through the fallopian tube and enters the uterus. At this stage, the embryo consists of 100 or so cells. The cells obtain their energy from the mitochondria that fill them. The mitochondria are responsible for all our movements. They are the cell's power stations. To develop further, the embryo must find its energy elsewhere. Thus, it hatches out of its membrane. 6 days after fertilization, the embryo settles into the uterus wall through the use of enzymes. This stimulates the production of a hormone that makes the pregnancy test positive. A pregnant woman may experience the first symptoms as early as the 8th day after fertilization. But why do women experience nausea and craving for certain foods?
Plants contain chemicals that act as toxic weapons against fungi and insects, and we find these in high quantities in spices, coffee, in certain kinds of green vegetables. and perhaps as an instinct and protective function for both the embryo and the mother. This is the reason why pregnant women have aversions against these items. Now, it's interesting that these kind of chemicals are not found in bread or in pasta, which may explain why women have cravings for these items. We're going to do a test of taste perception, and your task is to tell which of these that appeal to you and which that do not.
70% of pregnant women become more sensitive to tastes and odors. Two out of three women experience nausea with cooking smells, cigarettes, frying, spices, coffee, and alcohol. Stephen Norden has shown in particular that women who suffer from nausea have a lower risk of miscarriage. Nausea is most frequent between 5 and 15 weeks of gestation, which corresponds to the period when the embryo is especially fragile.
These odors will be either pleasant or unpleasant, and I want you that find them to be unpleasant to raise a hand.
Over the months to come, the body and the metabolism of the mother-to-be will change enormously. A future mother is indeed a chemical factory. In 9 months, she will produce as much estrogen and progesterone as she would in 150 years of life without pregnancy. Between the 2nd and 3rd weeks, the future spinal cord and nervous system begins to form. The embryo curls up on itself. At the end of the 3rd week, the rudimentary heart begins to beat and has the special feature of being the only organ already indispensable for the embryo's survival. Blood begins to circulate. At the end of the 1st month of development, the embryo measures 4 to 5 millimeters. It floats in the amniotic fluid. The upper part of this model represents the 2 halves of the embryo's brain, several days before they divide. For a long time, scientists had only these models made of layers of plaster for studying embryology. Since 1996, Professor Bradley Smith has been working on the reconstitution of embryos with virtual images using MRI techniques. The magnetic resonance scanner enables us to see below the skin and to witness the development of the brain, the spinal cord, and the vertebral column. These images, which provide a precise chronology of week-by-week organ development, constitute one of the researchers' most valuable databases.
People have often asked me why I made this atlas of human embryos, and as I think about it, I realize that although topologists have done a wonderful job of mapping the Earth, looking at it 1 centimeter at a time, nobody's until now has done a similar mapping of the human embryo. Now with this atlas, we have these wonderful images that let us look into the human body at very early stages of development and see ourselves in ways that we've never seen ourselves before.
At 6 weeks, all the sensory organs begin to form. The cells of the future eyes multiply by division and line up to form the long transparent fibers of the crystalline lens. The eyes, situated quite laterally and having no eyelids, become increasingly visible because of their pigmentation. The external earlobe, already visible, is completed towards 3.5 months. The auditory cells organize themselves. They will detect sound vibrations and transmit them via the auditory nerve to the brain. The tongue gradually becomes covered with taste buds, responsible for the sense of taste. At the 8th week, the embryo measures close to 3 centimeters. It adopts a truly human appearance, even if its fingers are still webbed, and the end of its body finishes in a tail.
This tiny little heart is beating at twice the rate of its mother. The reason is because the embryo is growing so fast, it's forming tissues and it's increasing in size and it's changing its shape. That requires huge amounts of energy, and the only source of energy for this tiny embryo is from the mother's bloodstream.
The heart is the first organ to develop completely. It now has 4 chambers and will grow bigger over the months to come. The nerve cells, isolated until now, move around inside the brain to take up their precise positions. The cells multiply at a rate of 250,000 per minute. In just 1 hour, the embryo's brain will have acquired 15 million new nerve cells. The embryo's own immune system is activated. There are nurse cells, which react against any intruder. The embryo can be observed by endoscopy using an optical fiber 1 millimeter in diameter. This technique is used for therapeutic indications under rigorous aseptic conditions. It provides unique views of life within the womb.
The embryo's capacity for development is astounding. It grows 1 millimeter in length per day. A fetus from the third trimester on will also increase in weight by 20 to 40 grams per day. And not only do these embryos and fetuses grow, their organs, which are present from the end of the embryonic period, undergo transformations so that at each stage of the pregnancy, the quality of the imagery and information gathered changes.
The embryo now has all its organs and will start to move very gently, although its movements are not yet coordinated. We are now at the 10th week of pregnancy. The embryo becomes a fetus. It has a human appearance. Floating in the amniotic fluid are numerous particles and its urine. This aquatic medium is renewed every 6 hours. The hands are now well formed. The fetus's skin is protected against rubbing by a substance called vermix. At this stage, girls and boys have the same undetermined genital tubercle. The transformation takes place at 12 weeks. If it's a girl, the tubercle becomes the clitoris, and the division in the genital folds deepens to form the labia. In a boy, the penis appears, followed 2 weeks later by the penile head and the foreskin. Erections are known to occur. The future sperm are already formed in the testicles, while the ovaries prepare their stocks of ova, 10 million, which will decrease to 2 million at the moment of birth. At 12 weeks, it is still too early to determine the sex using ultrasound. In a sitting position, the fetus measures about 10 centimeters. It is possible to observe it completely in its first amniotic bedroom.
So this looks great. Do you think we're ready to make the sculpture of Mrs. Kellner's embryo now, Mike?
I think so. I think everything's set.
Mothers love to come in for an ultrasound examination. It's the first time they have to meet their baby face to face. But ultrasound is difficult for a mother to understand. So by taking ultrasound data, we can make a sculpture, and the mother can now hold her baby in her hand and relate to all of the developing parts in a way that she can explain to her friends and her family. And this helps her to bond better. And in the future, we think that this may be something that becomes a part of a routine ultrasound exam where you can meet your baby before it's born.
I have a very nice surprise for you, Jenny.
Wow. What is that?
This is a sculpture of your embryo at 12 weeks.
We took the data from your 12-week visit, and we have a special machine that we send it to, which is like an inkjet printer.
This is really, I can hold my own baby in my hands. And I think this makes me feel much more like I know my child before she's born.
Professor Nelson thinks that this invention could one day revolutionize prenatal perception.
Ultrasound information can be sent via the internet anywhere in the world. So we could imagine a patient in South America or Australia sending their three-dimensional data to a specialized company that could make a fetal sculpture. And that could be made very quickly and then sent back to them through the standard post.
In the 4th month, the limbs lengthen. The fetus moves a great deal, often punching its umbilical cord, its first toy. This is also a magic moment for mothers. the first kicks. The red blood cells now form from stem cells in the bone marrow and ensure oxygen transport to the different tissues. Under the skin, the adipose tissues containing fat cells appear. These brown fat cells transform fats into energy to maintain the baby's body at the right temperature. Smile, you're being filmed. Between the 17th and 24th week, a second ultrasound scan is carried out. At this stage, the baby's sex can be discerned.
Look, he's counting.
1, 2, 3, just like his father.
At the 5th month, while swallowing the amniotic fluid, the fetus makes true facial expressions.
Look, he just made another funny grimace.
You can certainly say it's a grimace, but it's hard to know if it actually corresponds to an expression of pain. This is why 3D ultrasonography is so interesting. It shows us all the fetal expressions, whether they be grimaces or smiles. When shown images of such high quality, some patients will look for family resemblances. They'll find grandfather's nose, grandmother's mouth, uncle's chin, the ears of their first child. They go through the whole family tree.
I've never put ultrasound photos in our photo albums before, but look, this photo is so real. When you show me his nose like that, he has exactly the same nose as his brother.
During the final months of the pregnancy, the fetus's skin thickens and stretches. It finally forms a barrier to protect the body from the external environment. The adipose cells stock more and more fat. In just 3 months, the fetus will gain the equivalent of 50% of its birth weight. The fetus fattens, its senses become more acute, especially hearing.
Here we have the baby's cardiac tracing. Baby's sleeping, he's calm, it's very regular. So it's the ideal time for the test. Now we're going to ask you to put on these headphones so you can pick out the sounds we send to the baby.
On the tracing, Professor Grenier-Defer observes the changes in the fetus's cardiac rhythm in reaction to the sounds.
You can see here when we send this piano melody at 90 decibels, there's a nice little reaction of about 10 beats per minute. This sound is quite loud, like the sound of a truck.
All types of sound stimuli are tested, from a conversation at 60 decibels to a jackhammer at 100 decibels. The experiments have shown that at least 90 decibels are necessary to provoke an initial fetal reaction. The mother's abdominal wall acts as a filter. Whatever their nationality, voices are inaudible, except for that of the mother. The laughter heard by the fetus is that of its mother. A microphone is placed in the mother's uterus. She's talking with friends. Only the voice and laughter of the mother are audible, since they pass directly through the tissues. Here is music, recorded using the same method, through the womb.
Hello, baby. It's Daddy. 1, 2, 3.
The superfetus is in fact a myth. It's completely meaningless. The fetus, even close to term, hears like an elderly person. In other words, it's hard of hearing. So there's no point applying all these stimulations, it doesn't achieve anything. And during the critical phases of the development of the auditory system, it could even be harmful for the ear's development.
The ear recognizes the mother's music and the tongue heard regularly in utero. Memorization takes place during sleep, since the fetus spends 90% of its time sleeping. The inner ear has two functions, hearing and balance. The latter function is what enables us to position ourselves in space. This experiment has shown that the fetus reacts to large movements, but not to its mother walking. We're now a few weeks away from birth. Only these exceptional MRI images can provide us with a full view of the fetus. Most of its organs are already functioning. The fetus has a brain that is only 25% of its adult size. In fact, the mother must provide energy to her own brain and is unable to devote more to the development of her baby's brain.
Une pour moi, une pour toi, et pour moi.
I'm going to ask you to eat these aniseed-flavored sweets over the next 2 weeks of your pregnancy so that the aroma of aniseed will be transmitted to your fetus. Go ahead, help yourself. Help yourself? You can start eating them now.
The aim of this experiment, led by Professor Benoit Schall, is to show that the fetus is able to perceive and memorize strong aromas such as aniseed, curry, and garlic. In swallowing and inhaling amniotic fluid, the fetus tastes what its mother has eaten.
We can state quite clearly that the baby shares its mother's meals, except that it doesn't actually have a choice of menu. So in fact, the mother imposes her own preferences on the baby. However, the wider the range of maternal preferences and food choices, the more we might expect that the child will develop a curiosity about new foods after birth. But this remains to be demonstrated.
The 24 babies put on the aniseed diet in utero show that they recognize the aroma and seek it out with pleasure after birth.
Les sucettes à l'année, les sucettes à l'année d'Annie, donnent à ses baisers un goût anisé.
The experiment entails presenting them with the aniseed aroma on the right side of their faces and another stimulus on the left. Their reaction time is measured.
I see quite clearly that he is turning towards the aniseed pad. that he makes more searching movements on the aniseed side.
Within the amniotic fluid, the baby savors a soup with 490 ingredients, all with different smells and tastes.
Aïe, du salta! Oh, jeg blir helt kvalm.
When the baby passes from its amniotic fluid bubble into air, it takes with it this memory of prenatal smells and uses it after birth in its interactions with its mother to position itself against the maternal body and to accept to drink the maternal milk.
At full term, when the fetus's lungs are finally ready to pass from water to air, they secrete a great quantity of proteins called surfactants. The fetus, in regurgitating this chemical cocktail, activates the maternal macrophages, a type of white blood cell in the amniotic fluid. These macrophages penetrate the uterine wall, creating an inflammation, which provokes the first contractions.
Basically, the timing of birth is decided by the fetus. So maturity of the lungs at the time of birth is essential for the fetus to make the transition from an aquatic to an air-breathing environment. During development and late in development, the fetal lungs begin to make surfactant, which is a fatty substance that enables the little air sacs in the lung to remain expanded and prevents them from collapsing.
Occasionally, the baby is in no hurry to see the outside world. In Professor Mendelssohn's view, the fetus always has a good reason, in particular immature lungs. Uterine contractions always correspond with a big increase in proteins from the fetus's lungs.
Ved du hvad, Gunnar? Det her det er et meget stærkt øjeblik for mig.
Det er også for mig, Kirsten. Også for mig.
With the first cry, the baby's respiratory system is activated, and this is followed by a shunting of blood toward the lungs so that increased amounts of oxygenated blood can be carried to all tissues of the body. In the following hours, the digestive system is activated.
The acidity of the stomach and the secretions delivered by the liver and the pancreas break down the large food proteins into smaller molecules that the intestine is able to absorb. With the arrival of the first germs, the intestinal flora proliferate. Gradually, the kidneys become more efficient. A few days later, the immune system emerges. The lymphocytes patrol the blood vessels and eliminate harmful bacteria. After just a few weeks, the baby already has visual and olfactory preferences. The baby is quite naturally attracted by the odor of milk and of its mother, but also by the smell of its father. It is said that the family has an olfactory signature. The signature is also present in the mother and father, who are able to recognize the specific odor of their offspring. However, babies are also endowed with a sort of sense of beauty, as the experiment conducted by Dr. Alan Slater shows.
We're going to show your baby pictures of faces and see if they prefer to look at some rather than others.
The principle is to show photos of faces considered beautiful or ugly, according to adult criteria, to 100 or so babies.
Jackie, change the pictures. Newborn babies, even when they're just a few hours old, are particularly attracted to faces, and particularly to attractive faces, because attractive faces most closely approximate the proportions of the golden section that we know that babies and adults find attractive. The golden section is a ratio or a set of proportions that dates back to ancient Greek times that acts as an aesthetic marker for judging the beauty and pleasingness of various objects, because it represents symmetry and harmony and perfect proportions between the features of objects.
All the neurons are already present. Although they are not yet connected, the baby is still capable of making choices according to its preferences.
Older infants or children between the ages of 4 to 6 are developing a map of love which is culturally determined. This develops initially from the sensors of the newborn infant. The newborn is born with all sensors intact and able to make preferences or preferential judgments through all of its sensory modalities, and even aesthetic judgments in terms of face perception.
He's got your eyes, baby. Look at the color of his eyes.
No.
A little baby.